Okay, so at this point, we've set up an environment for our Django application. We've run it with GUnicorn, and we've also introduced PostgreSQL. So everything that we currently have is running on our PostgreSQL database, including the user that we currently have. So now it's time we set up Redis. So what is that one task we want to basically add to our task queue? We just set up this endpoint or this simple URL right here, which is one that takes quite a lot of time to respond. So what we can do is to make sure that we set up a background worker with Celery, and we can push this to the queue so that the user gets an instant response, but then we can still make that be made to operate in the background. So what I'm trying to say is that for tasks that take long on endpoints, we don't want users to wait until those tasks are finished. If they are not on demand, what we can do is to just make sure that they are executed in the background, and then we can return those results when users actually want them to do. And that's where Celery comes in. So we're going to be setting up Celery, and we're going to be setting up a worker for that. We're also going to be setting up Redis as the next service. To set up Redis to work with Celery in our Django application inside our Docker Compose setup, we'll first of all have to verify that we have Redis and Celery installed. Now, we already installed these at the beginning of the video, but we can verify by running the command Celery. So if we run this command and we see the different subcommands and options, we are good to go. We can also pip list to check if we have Redis CLI or the Redis client for Python installed. And therefore we can see it installed right here, which is Redis 5.2.1, which is good. So that means that we now have to set up that service or Redis service to run within our Docker Compose setup. Now right here is the official image of Redis, and to add this we'll just have to first of all comment out this service right here, which is our Redis service. So inside here is where we shall specify the image similar to what we did for Postgres. So the image is going to be Redis, and then the tag we shall use is 7 Alpine, but you can feel free to use any of the tags specified down here. You can choose one of your choice. So another thing we want to understand is the different commands we can run with Redis server, because that's going to be the service. So just like you see from here, we run docker run, which is running from this image. Then they provide some name, and then they run it as a daemon or in the background. Then we can provide these arguments. I'm going to copy all of this, and then that's the command I'll use to run the container here. So I'll just come and say contain or command, sorry. So command is going to be Redis server, and then the Redis server will run. It will save data to the disk every 60 minutes, and then we shall set up our log level to warning. Now another thing I'm going to add is going to be require us, which is going to add some like password based authentication, so that all clients require a password to log into our Redis. So I'll just provide an environment variable here, which I'll call the Redis password. So that Redis password is going to be set up in here, so we have to come right here and add it. I'll add Redis password, and then I'll set it to a password of my choice. So for this case, I'll leave that to test pass123. If I go back to docker compose.yaml, I'll then go ahead and still set up an environment variable for that password. So I'll just come add an environment key, and then I'll specify a value to be the Redis password. So I will provide that. I think I've done a mistake here, sorry. So that's going to be the Redis password, and then we shall set that to be our Redis password. So I'm going to be using VS Code to make this uppercase. I'll just search upper. And yeah, we now have our Redis password environment variable. Now, one other thing we need to do is to add this to a network, set the ports, and create the volume. So for our case, we are going to start with the ports. So I'll say that we shall expose the port 6379, which is a default Redis port, to the host is 6379. So that's what we shall have for the ports. And then we shall have to create a volume. So we shall provide volumes. Let us just call this Redis. And in this case, we shall just have a folder called data, where we shall keep our Redis data. Now, another important thing is to add this to a network so that their containers will be in position to communicate with it. So we shall say that our network is going to be the same network we've set up right here, which is our app network. So yeah, we have set up our volumes, we have set up our network. Now, the other thing we need to do is to go ahead and add the dependency on this Redis. So our Django app and our Celery instance will all depend on this Redis. It's very important that we go ahead and specify that. So I'm going to minimize this. If I go to our Django app right here, I'll go to depends on, and then I will add Redis. So our app will depend on Redis. Now, once that is done, let's go ahead and see if this has been added to our setup. So what we shall do is to, first of all, stop our containers with Control and C. And then when we rebuild the entire setup, so properties network not allowed, that's supposed to be networks. I think I made that mistake in Redis, so I have to fix that. If I go back here, Redis refers to undefined volume Redis, so I also have to specify that down here in my volumes. And once that is done, we can now rebuild everything. Now we see that Redis is being pulled and added to our setup. This will depend on your internet. All right, so now that everything is set up, we can see that our Django app service has been built. Our volume for Redis is being created. The container has been created for Redis. We have our Django app 1 container. We have Redis. So we have 3 services now. We have the Django app, the PostgreSQL database, and the Redis instance. So to verify if that is running, we can do docker compose ps, and that will show us 3 services: app, Django app, and Redis. If you are not interested in seeing the command line, you can go ahead and see that all in your Docker desktop. So right here, we shall see Docker desktop showing us the compose stack. So this compose stack is going to have 3 services: DB, Redis, and app1. So I'll go ahead and close that for now. And when you go back here, we now need to verify if our Redis is running. So we can now do the docker compose ps, copy this service name here, and then we can use that service name. So we can do something like docker logs or docker compose logs Redis. Oh, that's not actually showing us our logs. So maybe let me just try to docker compose exec-it, and then I'll run the Redis service. I run this on the Redis service, and then I'll run the Redis CLI inside the Redis service. So that will show us localhost 6379. So that means we are already inside our Redis service. So let's try to ping. So I'll try to run ping, and then we see that we require a password to access that service. So for this to work, we have to access it by first of all providing the password via auth, and then we have to use that same password we provided in here in our .env. So that's going to be our test pass 123, but you please need to have a very strong password, because brute force attacks may be used to crack into your Redis CLI. So once we provide that password, we are now authenticated. So if we try to ping, in this case, we can pong. That means that we are connected to this service. Now things are going to be interesting from here. We've been able to set up our Redis instance. So the next thing we're going to do is to make Celery work with Django. And when you make Celery work with Django, that means that we'll be in position to go ahead and finally use our worker with our Redis. So for that to work, I've opened up a page on Django's guide to setting up Celery with Django, and we can now use that to set up Celery to work with our Django application. So the first thing we need to see here is that Celery now supports Django 2.2, blah, blah, blah. And then to use Celery with our Django application, we can define an instance of the Celery by calling an app. So what we need to do here is to go ahead and have this layout where our manage.py is located inside our project folder or our root project folder. And then we can have the settings, the URLs, and then we need to create a celery.py file. So what I'm going to do is to head over to our project right here. I'll go to our core. I'll create a new file here. I'll call that celery.py. And inside our celery.py is where we're going to set up our Celery app instance. So we need to first of all import that. Now I may copy whatever we have up here and place it in here. But what this is actually doing is to import OS, import the Celery class, and then set the Celery or set the environment variable for our settings file. So Celery is always going to need to view the Django settings.py file. So it's very important that we set this up for the Celery instance to view. So that's what they are doing up here. So we set the default Django settings module. For this case, that's going to be our project.settings, but for our case, it's core settings. So I'll just come right here and set that up to core.settings. Then we need to also specify the Celery instance. So this will take in the name of our project. Now that has to be the same module in which we have our Celery instance. So I'll have to point it there. I'll then point to core instead of project. Once that is done, we will have to use or set Celery settings inside our settings.py. So use a string here means the worker doesn't have to serialize the configuration object to child processes. And then the namespace Celery means that all Celery related configuration will have to start with a prefix Celery underscore. So that means that in our settings.py, we have to add our Celery setup. So I'm going to come down here and add Celery setup or Celery config, whatever I want to call it. And in here is where we're going to add our Celery broker URL. So that's going to be the URL for our Redis. Now keep in mind that this is something we have to set up in here. So we need to go ahead and add that Redis URL environment variable. So I'll just come right here, transform that to uppercase. Then I'll say Redis equals, and I'll then come and say Redis. So we've set that up, but remember, it's going to be running with our Docker Compose setup instead of our localhost. So we need to provide our password. So Redis works in a way that you have to provide the password by adding this colon. Then you'll add the password just like we added right here. So that's going to be test pass 123, and then add the host. So that's going to be Redis because we named that service Redis. And since they're in the same network, we can access that Redis service with its service name, which is Redis. Then we can point to a database. So I'll just provide the default database, which is 0. So that's going to be our Redis URL right there. So if we come right here, we can then access our environment variable with os.getenv. And then we can provide the Redis URL. So the Redis URL in this case will be red, but in case we do not have one, Then we can point Redis to Redis localhost port 6379 and then /0. That's if a user has Redis installed on their local machine. So once that is done, we can now also set up the Celery result backend. So in case you have some tasks that will run and return results, Celery will always keep those results in Redis using this result backend. So the Celery result backend will be set to Redis, just like we did right here for the Celery broker URL. So going back to our guide right here, we need to import this app in the project ini.py file, and this will ensure that our app will be loaded when Django starts the shared task decorator. So this is the decorator we shall use to mark our tasks. So I'm going to copy this, and this is what I'll go and add to our project level init.py file. So I'll just search for that. For the core project folder, init.py is where we shall add this, so that when you use the shared task decorator, we can then use that same app instance right here. So going back, we need to basically understand this is for larger projects. Simple projects may use a single app instance. Then we need to also set up this Django settings module, which we have done. Then you can also have our settings. So most of the things we have done here are basically the ones that are being explained right here. One other important thing is if we go back to our Celery core celery.py, we have this app.auto-discover tasks. So once we have our app instance set up, our app exposed, we want Celery to go ahead and just discover all tasks inside a tasks.py file. So that's what we're going to be doing. So we can go ahead and simply add those tasks.py files. So I'll do that for the simple test app we created right here. I'll create a file called tasks.py, and this task will automatically be discovered by Celery. So what I need to do is to maybe split that simple code that we created that's supposed to delay the execution or the working of that URL. So I'm going to go to our tasks.py. I'll create a function. So what I'll do is to define a function here. Maybe I'll call it a long running task. And then we may even provide a delay of our own. So we may provide the default to be true. So when I come in here, what I want to do is to go ahead and make this sleep end time and then print the end time. So I'll import these two classes. I'll say import time. Actually, time is a module, and then from the datetime package, shall go ahead and import the date time. So that means that we are going to be in position to have this as our long running tasks. Then we shall call it within our view. So then we'll get rid of this code right here. So I'll save this, go back to our task. Now we need to mark this as a task by using the Celery shared task decorator. So I'll say from Celery, import shared task, and we'll be in position to access that shared task decorator. So I'll say at shared task, and this will be marked as a task by Celery. Now I don't know why this is not being recognized. I think I need to point VS Code to my virtual environment. So that's what I'll do. And yeah, we can now be in position to use our task right here. So let's just have a smooth recap of what we've so far done. We have so far set up Celery to work with our Django app, and we have also added another service, which we call the Redis service. The Redis service is going to be found within a Docker Compose file, and it's going to run Redis Alpine, but it will basically make use of our command right here to set up the environment. Basically, what we did in the same way, we set up Postgres. And now we've set up Celery, so we need to create the Celery worker, which will be responsible for running our app. If we were to go back to this simple guide right here, they are telling us about a shared task decorator, which helps us to basically describe how these will be accessed or how these will be marked as tasks. So what I'm interested in currently is to be in position to at least see how the worker will run. So this is the command that we're interested in. Now, since this is going to be a separate task, one thing I'm going to do is to go and create a Docker file for that Celery task. So what I'll do is to go to Docker files. I'll add a new folder. This is going to be found within the Docker files folder. So I'll just call this Celery. Actually, this is going to be a folder just like I did for the app. Create this folder, I'll call it Celery. And then I will add the Docker file. So once I've added the Docker file, now we're going to write the Docker file for this. So the Docker file for this is going to be very similar to what we have here. The only difference is going to be that the command for running this will be the Celery command. So I'll just paste what we have in there to install the requirements, copy that, expose that. But the command here will be the command to run our Celery, which is this command right here. So what we need is to point to the place where I created the Celery app instance. So I think I made a mistake here. Let me just get rid of this. And if I come here, copy this command, we can now see that we need to point to the project. In this case, it's going to be our core, and then worker, and then log level is going to be info. So what we've done here is to write a Docker file for our Celery worker. It will basically do everything we did in the Docker file for our app, but it will run a Celery worker instead of running our app. So the Celery command will take in the app. So the app is just the location of the app instance or the Celery app instance. In this case, that's going to be our core, which is our Celery, where our Celery app is found. And then we shall have to specify the log info. So that's the log level that will be set up right there. Now we need to go ahead and make the Celery worker work with our Redis. So I'm going to go ahead and uncomment this. And after uncommenting this, I'll then come right in here. And what I'll do is to go ahead and specify the way we're going to build that worker. So I'll do build, and then shall have the context as dot, meaning we want that to be built within a root project folder. Then we shall specify our Docker file. So our Docker file in this case is going to be the Docker files /Celery /Docker file. So once that has been set up, we need to then specify the command that we're going to be using to run, or we may even stick to that one command that is set in our Docker file. So once that is done, now let's go ahead and basically set up some environment variables. Now I always also set up this environment variable for the Django settings module, just right in here within the Celery setup, so that things at least work. So I'll just add it here, Django settings module, and then we'll have to provide our core.settings. All right, I think that's what we need for our Celery app. So let's go ahead and rebuild our services or run our services. I'll stop the setup with Control and C. And then we'll run docker compose app build. And this time we expect it to build and run our services, including the Celery worker we have so far set up. So just like you can see right there, we have our Celery, we have our Django app, we have our container, we see we have our Celery, our Django app, our Redis. So these are the services we've so far set up. We have Celery, the database, the Django app, and Redis. So that's our simple setup right here.